Kamala Harris continues to climb the polls while her running mate professes his allegiance to socialism.
One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Will Kamala lead America down the path to wokeism?
Like, everybody needs to be woke.
Or might Christians finally find the guts to reclaim Christian America? Wait. America isn't a Christian nation. It's a secular constitutional republic. Separation of church and state and other things that make me sound clever. Hold up. No, it's not a secular nation.
Jesus, man.
America has and better continue to be a Christian nation, or it'll start to look like the UK. I'm not sure if you've been paying attention to what's happened over there, but I'm not even talking about the bad teeth.
Yeah, baby! Yeah.
I'm talking about biased policing, militating against its citizens for tweets.
We will throw the full force of the law at people. And whether you're in this country committing crimes on the streets or committing crimes from further afield online, we will come after you.
Roving gangs of military-aged Muslim men and white males rioting and looting, all because of a loss of their national identity. Today, I'll tell you why America has been and better continue to be a Christian nation, or it can expect what's happening in Britain to come to our shores. We'll talk about that and more today on Indie Thinker. Welcome to the show. My name is Reed Uberman. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Today's show is sponsored by our friends over at Sailor Ridge. If you're looking for a perfect vacation spot, yeah, you may be back in school now and vacations may be a thing of the past. You may be looking at those old pictures and weeping tears of sorrow that you can't take another one, but fall break will be just right around the corner. Or you may just want a weekend getaway. If you do, you need to check out our friends over at Sailor Ridge, where you can check out their awesome treehouse locations, even the Shiloh, which kind of has a Shire-esque feel to it. And there's so much more. To see all the amenities and all the properties that they have over at Sailor Ridge, go to sailorridgetreesort.com today. And when you do so, let them know that Indie Thinker sent you. Now, I want to explain to you what's been happening in the UK in case you've been living under a rock and you don't know. But 3 children were killed and 9 others were injured in a stabbing attack at an event. It was a dance that was themed after Taylor Swift. Don't know why you would take your kids to that, but nonetheless, people were, and there were some kids that were there. And in that dance school, there was a young Rwandan man who is a UK national, from everything that I've heard. He went there armed, killed 3 young girls, and then injured many more. It was initially leaked that this individual was a Muslim, and that, I want to be clear, I don't believe has been confirmed. I'm not totally up to date with all of the information that's coming out of the UK and as far as this story is concerned, because it's not my news, and trust me, we've got a lot of problems here in America. But as far as I can tell, it has never been confirmed that this individual was a Muslim. But the reason that those citizens who have been concerned about this story perhaps initially jumped to that conclusion is because the UK has been experiencing an incredible crime wave based upon illegal immigration and just open borders immigration into the country, predominantly from Muslim countries. And let's just say that some of those Muslims have not been behaving when they come to the shores of the UK without assimilation into the culture. So there has been a lot of outrage online as a result of this attack, and that outrage turned into rioting and looting in the city streets in the UK. And of course, this was immediately claimed that these were far right-wing extremists who were sick and tired of immigration and people of color in their country. And try to find right now a news report from the UK talking about the roving bands of young military-aged Muslims, and you will not find anything. But that is also going on at the same time. So there are agitators who are rioting and looting, and there is no excuse for that whatsoever, but they say they are doing it as a response to much of the crime that is happening, and not even in particular just this recent stabbing. But then there are also, as a result of that, roving bands of Muslims who are armed with machetes and knives and going through the city streets supposedly to defend themselves.
We will do our protection ourselves, and a message to Keir Starmer is, we don't need your funding. We will fund and protect the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
All of this was exacerbated by the way in which UK officials, political and the media and the police have been have been responding to this thing. So here's a police chief that essentially wants to tell you, if you post anything online, including the villainous Elon Musk, you will face the full consequences of the law. Not the people who are murdering others, the real criminals here, tweeters.
That because we have seen some high-profile figures whipping up the hatred. You talked about it in there with the officers, in fact, about this being added to by online commentary. I mean, I'm even thinking of the likes of Elon Musk getting involved. What are you considering when it comes to dealing with people who are whipping up this kind of behaviour from behind a keyboard, maybe in a different country?
Being a keyboard warrior does not make you safe from the law. You can be guilty of offences of incitement, of stirring up racial hatred. There are numerous terrorist offences regarding the sort of publishing of material.
And so as you can tell, all of this is creating an untenable living situation in the UK. We might be able to say a lot about the agitators on both sides here, but something underneath all of this screams for our attention. This kind of unrest, justified or not, can be traced back to a nation that is experiencing identity crisis. Loss of national identity in favor of multiculturalism, in other words. So I would argue that the national identity of the UK is predominantly and intrinsically religious. So no assimilation into the religious identity of the UK, which is undeniably and historically Christian, is creating a vacuum, and that vacuum is being filled by chaos. Now, I would argue that it's chaos from those who are rioting and looting and causing random acts of violence. Christianity might be a little bit of a salve for that. And then also a group of people that I would argue who have a religious bent towards militancy might know that if they come to a Christian nation, that is not going to be tolerated. We love our enemies here, and we have justice here, which is as a result of due process. Now, all of that might be intact if religious and national identity was in place rather than a multicultural pluralism. For proof of this Christian decline in the UK, I could point you to a million different places, but just one will do, hopefully, and it's the great book by Douglas Murray, The War on the West. In this book, he argues that the UK has given way to assimilation into the culture, and those kind of practices are dissolving in favor of a woke cultural pluralism that is based upon its shame from its supposed Christian imperialistic past. So it goes something like this. Because in the past, the United Kingdom, the English, they were Christian and they were slave traders and they were imperialistic. So somehow Christianity is to blame for these men who did these evil things, and the way to make up for that in the present is to open up the borders wide in the UK and just let people into this interminably racist country. Now you try to make sense of that if you can whatsoever. But the whole point is that this is a sentiment based upon emotions rather than practicality, and you can see it fully on display here.
Reparations movement in the UK. In his last Prime Minister's questions before his death, he asked for an apology to the people of African descent, living and dead, for our country's role in slavery and colonialism.
So apparently it's not enough that William Wilberforce, a white dude, by the way, and people like John Newton saw fit to make sure that the slave trade in the UK was abolished once and forever. Forget about the fact that almost overnight, that the UK went from a slave trading nation to a nation that used its Royal Navy to patrol the seas in order to bust people, pirates who were taking slaves from Africa and bringing them over to America or wherever they might bring them. So all of that happened as a result of the UK's Christian past. But apparently we still have to make reparations in the present for all those things that took place ages ago. Now, I can't help but wonder as I sit back and look at the state of the UK right now and think about the people who have militated against Christianity and wonder if they're a little bit sorrowful. I mean, we've already heard from the likes of Richard Dawkins, who has finally come out and said, I'm a cultural Christian.
I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian.
I can't help but now also want to ask if the likes of Alex O'Connor wants to now apologize or maybe even think twice about trying to tear down and undermine the Christian past of his nation. because it has held it together for a long time. And as it has started to dissolve, so has the country. To the point where I would argue, much like my friend Calvin Robinson, who's been on the show before, and Jamie Bambrick, that it's revival or bust, baby. It's Jesus and a revival of religion for that nation, or I'm not sure that it has much of a future. I mean, we'll see. But the one thing I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt is not only the UK has a Christian past that is important to its foundation, but also America. And I know there's going to be plenty who will run to the comment section and will argue that neither the UK or America are Christian nations, unless it comes to trying to blame people in the present for historic past. Then we'll say, oh, well, that's perfectly Christian, right? Of course, we know the Crusades were perfectly Christian, but nothing in the present today that we have is as a result of Christianity, because atheists, secular hedonists, and humanists, they did it all from their blood, sweat, and tears. Well, forgive me. But not only is the UK a Christian nation, but America is a Christian nation. And it depends on how you parse this out, but I don't think it's really that hard to see. But let's hear what Alex O'Connor, since we just brought him up, has to say about this in a debate, or at least the question that he asked in a debate with Michael Knowles on the subject of whether or not America is a Christian nation.
But whether the country that you're in is best described in a historical sense as a Christian nation. And I've heard you say before that it is. And I've heard you use phrases like the soul of America is Christian and saying things like this. And I suppose the first thing I wanted to clarify is, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you do say that America is a Christian nation, or perhaps ought to be a Christian nation, are you talking here legally, like in terms of the documents, the Constitution, or are you just talking about the culture or something like that, or the philosophy undergirding the legal element of this conversation?
Well, thanks for the question, Alex. Now, he was asking Michael Knowles, but I'm going to try to answer it here. Is America a Christian nation? It depends on what you mean by that. Do you mean that America is Christian in that it has a Christian monarch and that it's going to force everybody that comes here to be Christian, and you have to be a Christian to be an American, and there's going to be an assimilation policy where everybody has to declare what church they go to on Sunday before they can ever declare themselves a citizen of this nation? Or does it mean just simply based upon our uppercase C Constitution and our lowercase c Constitution, kind of our morals, our sentiments, our philosophy, that all of that is undergirded by Christianity in such a way that you would not have America if it weren't for Christianity? Now, much like the UK, I understand that we're trying to dissolve and destroy all of that as a result of the progressive and deconstruction movement and more broadly postmodernism. But it doesn't undermine the fact that undeniably that it's hard to parse whether our uppercase C Constitution is Christian and different and opposed to our lowercase c Constitution, our philosophy, and our morals. Because I think it's not really that neat. I think the uppercase C Constitution is a byproduct of our lowercase c Constitution. And by that, I just mean this. Look at the Declaration of Independence that preceded our Constitution. Now, our Constitution is very kind of litigious, and it frames the way in which our country is going to work, especially before you get to the amendments, First Amendment, Second Amendment, and Third Amendment that deal with freedom of speech, association, all these kind of things, and right to bear arms. So before you get to that, you get to a very boring kind of like the distribution of powers, the separation of powers. But that whole idea of what our nation would look like, you can find the lowercase c Constitution of the uppercase c Constitution in the Declaration of Independence. And of course, we all know that it says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Right there, already, you've got Creator and created. Well, what Creator might they be talking about there? There's no confusion about this whatsoever with anybody paying attention. Everyone knows, whether you want to call them deists or you want to call them Christians or whatever you want to say, everyone knows the Creator they have in mind there is the God of the Old and New Testament. I can go even further back with you because I think the Declaration of Independence and then later our Constitution all comes from a seedbed that started at the beginning of this nation before we had any of those things. And you can see it in the Mayflower Compact. And that starts off like this. In the name of God, amen. we whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, defender of the faith, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of Christian faith and honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia. Glory of God? Spreading the Christian faith? You mean that was a original part of America? Yeah, it was. So even further than that, let me argue something that very few people know, and that is that the Second Great Awakening in America was the catalyst for the abolition of slavery. Perhaps this fact is hidden because it blows the 1619 Project to bits, maybe because it shines a positive light on white people, in particular white Christian males, for their part in rescuing America from its history of enslavement of people. But this little known fact will come as a surprise to many secularists, but it is true that Christians are responsible for abolition in the West, not only in the UK, but in America. This kind of blindness of our Christian past is far too common for those who resist the faith in pursuit of hedonic pleasure or still participate in navel-gazing that is wildly ahistorical. Maybe because people have still been hanging on to their community college professors' lessons about how evil the God of the Bible is. No, I get it. It's totally inconvenient to congratulate Christianity when your whole life is built upon trying to destroy it. We all know the types out there, the kind of interminable, insufferable people that want to constantly try to mock Christianity as though we believe in a fairy tale God, even though their religion has done nothing for the world as we know it, and ours basically made it. But that kind of blindness is far too common, not just among atheists, but also among Christians. And my real concern here is not even the secularist, but my concern here is the Christian. I'm talking about the individual who is happy to dance on their grave when the world is falling apart outside of us. Now listen, love the song if you want. I kind of like it. It's catchy. Fine. Okay, but I'm not saying that God isn't worthy of praise no matter what's happening. He certainly is, and we should continue to do it. All I'm saying is that we better decide, whether you be a secular person or a Christian person, if we're going to pay attention to the world around us and pay attention to the thing that actually holds us together. Rather, I see many Christians still using these arguments. Well, Christians aren't supposed to be political. We're just supposed to preach the gospel. Excuse me, real quick. Let me ask you a question. Is abortion a political issue or a moral issue? Is the border in human trafficking, the smuggling of drugs over our border, and the ways in which they kill people and impact their lives, moral issue, political issue? What about marriage and how we define it? Moral issue or a political issue? Hopefully we understand now that the ways in which we try to compartmentalize these things are not that clean cut. And the truth is that all of our policies, for the most part, I can think of very few exceptions, maybe like tax law or something, but even then, all of our policies are undergirded by a moral constitution, a moral philosophy. And we are going to have to ask ourselves, what philosophy do we want? For the longest time, people have argued, well, in America, we're a secular nation. We're a nation of the separation of church and state. Well, listen, someone's Bible is going to be open to dictate morality so that we can create policies based upon that morality. And I see no reason why we should let the secular humanist read from their Bible to dictate policies and not the Christian to dictate policies. I believe the best ideas should win. And obviously, I think I know where those ideas lie. But the point is that somebody is going to get the final say in terms of what dictates our policies, what kind of morality are we as a nation going to center around. This is something called social contract theory. Now, this is really illustrated as far back as Socrates, but most profound in Hobbes. And I don't really want to take their ideas to their ultimate conclusion because there's probably ways in which I ultimately disagree with them. I am just saying this, that whether it's implicit or explicit, so explicit in our laws or implicit in our moral values, we are a Christian nation. And if we move away from that, well then ultimately what we will have is we'll just have individualized autonomy where this person, they decide what they think is right and this person thinks they do what they think is right. We're going to have to decide whether or not we truly want a nation that is organized around that kind of individualized autonomy. But that's where progressivism is absolutely leading us. And it's an untenable situation. Every society, whether they know it or not, is agreeing upon a certain set of morals to order their society around. And I would argue that in America, we are still largely Christian. And if that ever changes, well then, we can expect what we're seeing in the UK to happen here. This is perfectly illustrated in a book I just got done reading. I would recommend it to anybody, called Pagan America. The thesis of the book by John Daniel Davidson is simply this, that when you get rid of Christian America, you only have another option, and it's pagan America. Something will take the place of Christianity, and we're seeing pagan ideology and idolatry take the place of Christianity in America. And I think this is absolutely true. You can see it in things like Nicole Hannah-Jones's 1619 Project. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, Reed, what are you going on about? How is this a kind of manifestation of paganism? Well, simple. The 1619 Project is all about ancestral sin and atoning for that ancestral sin in America. So that's a pagan idea, not a Christian idea. The Christian idea is that you have individual responsibility before God to atone for the sins that you committed. But Nicole Hannah-Jones and her 1619 Project leads us to the belief that ultimately, because of our historically racist past, we have ancestral sin that we have to atone for in the present. And the only way to atone for that sin is a pagan offering to the gods, as it were, which comes, I think, in the form of reparations. If you give enough money, you can atone for this sin in your past. And only through that will you ever be able to. So you see how paganism crops through our institutions when Christianity is not on the throne? We're going to have to eventually decide as Christians whether we want to be embarrassed about our past or whether we want to be bold about our past. And if we are not bold, I fear for the future of America. I fear that we don't have as many of the leaders as we need, as we used to in the past. People like Charles Finney. Now, this guy was one of the pivotal leaders in the Second Great Awakening, which I already mentioned was responsible for the abolition of slavery. Now, these men made no mistake about it. They didn't argue the way Christians do today about being political and making sure you just stay in your lane and keep your Christianity out of the public square. No, these men actually had morals and a backbone. And they said things like this. I proceed to mention some things which ought to be done to continue this great and glorious revival of religion, which has been in progress for the last 10 years. And this is what he says about revival. There should be great and deep repentings on the part of ministers. We, my brethren, must humble ourselves before God. It will not do for us to suppose that it is enough to call on the people to repent. We must take the lead in repentance and then call on the churches to follow. Finney goes on and he says this. The church must take right ground in regard to politics. Do not suppose that I am going to preach a political sermon or that I wish to have you join in getting up a Christian party in politics. No, you must not believe that. But the time has come that Christians must vote for honest men and take consistent ground in politics. They must let the world see that the church will uphold no man in office who is known to be a knave or an adulterer or a Sabbath breaker or a gambler or a drunkard. Such is the spread of intelligence and the facility of communication in our country, that every man can know for whom he gives his vote. And if he will give his vote only for honest men, the country will be obliged to have upright rulers. All parties will be compelled to put up honest men as candidates. You may think to yourself, that doesn't sound like Donald Trump, but I can also argue it certainly doesn't sound like Kamala Harris. And let me tell you that because Christians have been so silent in the public square, we have now gotten to the place where we're not talking about knaves, drunkards, and adulterers, but we're actually talking about whether or not we should kill babies. And that's where we have to start if we're going to start anywhere. So, the choice as far as Trump and Kamala is concerned, where that is the issue, there's no contest whatsoever. If America is going to have a future, we're going to have to realize that that future can only be built upon one foundation, and that is the Christian America that we have had in our past and that we better make sure we have in the future. All right, thanks so much for watching. Love to hear from you down in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and check out our sponsors while you're in the comment section. And most importantly, go with God.